Hello and welcome to the Ekimetrics podcast. I'm Inga Hatton. I'm the head of our commercial team for Ekimetrics in the UK, and I'm joined by Matt Andrew, our managing partner and usual host of our podcast. But today Matt is sat on the other side and has agreed to be interviewed. Hi, Matt. And what is it like on that side of the table?
Yeah, it's a bit awkward on this side of the table. I'm used to asking the questions. So looking forward to this session because I think it's a really exciting time in this industry. There's a lot from media fragmentation to commercial pressures to inflation, external factors, to the rise of AI and what that means. So there's a lot to discuss in this space.
Today we're discussing marketing mix modeling, or MMM, and going a bit back to basics. So, marketing mix modeling has been around for many decades, but it sort of fell out of favor for a little while. It's really come back to the center because of cookie deprecation, but also hopefully because that focus on brand building and long-term returns is just becoming important again, which is great to see. And because of that, a lot of companies who haven't had MMM or haven't used it recently are kind of coming back. And what we've done is just looking at some of the most searched terms, questions around MMM. Naturally, that goes a bit back to basics. But we're excited to dig into them and to see what you think about them. So I'll just get started on the very first question, which is, what is MMM and how does it work?
So marketing mix modeling it's not a complicated technique. There's lots of things you can do to make it complicated, but at essence, it's looking backwards at what you did. So taking your historical data in a time series form, mostly that will be weekly data, but there's other things that you can do. Most people focus on media, and that's really where it's had most usage in companies is examining media effects. But it's really important to capture all of those different factors that can affect a business. So not just your media, but your marketing activities, your pricing, promotion, distribution, but also external factors like what your competitors are doing, how the market is evolving, macroeconomic factors, etc. And the purpose of that is using a statistical model to separate out each of those effects and say which ones are causing incrementality and sales, which ones are detracting from your business, and giving you this kind of map of how has your business evolved, why, and what can you tell from that to plan better going forwards. Really, it's necessary because in a real world, for a business, year-on-year performance, for example, can give you a figure of I've grown by 5%, but all of the factors around that might have changed. And so actually what drove that and why is why you need these types of models to understand what you can do and what you can learn from it to plan better in the future.
And I know that incrementality is really important for marketers to show, the impact of their work. But there are other analytics approaches as well. What makes MMM so powerful?
MMM itself, marketing mix modeling, is not a silver bullet that does everything. And there are lots of other analytics techniques that are important and have a role to play in how you steer your business. But the power of MMM is that it can really act as this unifying layer that keeps all of those other analysis tools in check. If you take something like a multi-touch attribution, lots of discussion about that in the market and how that's with the deprecation of cookies over time and the loss of signal that you have getting harder and harder to resolve and understand. But fundamentally, it misses activity that isn't tracked in the attribution solution, which tends to be all of your offline data, but also all the external factors and competition. And so we're really looking to attribute the effects to true incrementality, not just what was in a path, but what was in a path and incremental. Experiments also really important. That's a lot of discussion at the moment around the role of experiments and how those actually can be a really strong starting point to someone going through a marketing analytics journey. The challenge is they don't scale very well. They're hard to implement. They don't scale. And so you really need this mix of different techniques coming together to have an MMM. So with higher spend, with offline spend especially, having that marketing mix model allows you to really steer and understand what's going on.
And looking at, you talked about having a mix of approaches, but just looking at MMM, what are some of the benefits that you can expect to get from having that approach in place?
I think the default approach and where most people think and focus their energy when they think about a marketing mix modeling program is in optimizing media spend. That's kind of the basic core MMM reason for being. Typically, that will be your annual budget plan, but it can go into quarterly budget steering. If you have a budget cut, what's the best thing to do with that? And that's really the use case that most people understand MMM is there for and think is limited to as well, which is a challenge, because actually with the way, if you have a well-constructed marketing mix model, if you have a complete set of data feeding into that, the range of applications is just so much broader. So you can think about long-range planning. So you're identifying investment cases for how you invest behind your brand over the long term, or how you think about the role that product innovation is playing in terms of your mix over time, which brands to invest in, which products and categories to allocate towards, how do you bring together your kind of category growth assumptions alongside how you're generating a return on investment to create an impact. Clearly, then you talk about more detailed planning of the long and short, or brand versus performance, and how you kind of steer between those two. What is the right mix for where you are now, for how you move from that point positively going forwards, and how do you make sure that you're not kind of tying yourselves to media inflation from a pure performance marketing perspective. But then the depth of data that you have allows you to dig into things like creative performance. So again, in a really well-constructed model, you can feed in information about your creative strength and the different types of creative that feed into it, and get a better steer of which part of the aspects of your program are doing well for you. Is it the way that you're planning your media? Is it the strength of your creative? How do those two synergize and come together? And then ultimately, a really detailed execution lets you go into this in-year steering process and making sure that you're actually making those tweaks as you go through the year, as you go through campaign planning, to optimize and make sure you're having the best effect at that kind of execution level as well.
So that does sound really powerful, but it is starting to also sound quite complex. And do you feel that the breadth of things that you can do with MMM does become complex and is maybe a barrier for people to get started?
So I think going back to that core, what does MMM deliver? If you think about the basic use case of media allocation and optimization, it's not the most complex thing for an organization to get behind and deliver, but it also limits the potential of what you can do from it, and it limits the understanding and the impact that you can have overall. To kind of unlock some of those more complex use cases, it really requires some cross-functional collaboration and thinking. So the ability for a marketing mix model to break down some of the silos, to bring teams together that might not communicate as much. Typically, that might be the brand and a performance marketing team. They might work in really different ways. In a business that is really using it to its fullest extent, that can be bringing your commercial and sales team together with your marketing team to say, okay, how do we better plan between the promotions that we're running, the knowledge of the incrementality? Do we even need those promotions if we're structuring our brand investments in the right way? And to really capture some of those more dynamic, interesting, transformative use cases through that planning. It's definitely a lot more challenging than just shifting budget from one channel to another. It takes a lot more organization. It takes a lot more decision points and ability to bring people together that have their own roles to do and their own way of working. But the size of prize when you get that right is so much bigger than just focusing on your media execution. And if just to take something like an automotive industry as an example, maybe 20 to 30% of their kind of cost as a business is in media, and the other 70 to 80% will be in pricing cuts, promotional incentives and things like that. So if you're not steering that properly, you're really missing the biggest opportunity to actually optimize and change your business model.
Makes sense. And I think we do have a question coming up about implementation. So probably some of those organizational points are going to be really critical there. But first on to another, quite elementary question. What data is needed to build an MMM model?
Yeah. So, I mean, the foundation of MMM is that you need good data in to get good insights out. And that's, I think, with anything, bad data, bad outcomes. And so getting the right data in the first place is really important. For a typical business, you're looking at 2 to 5 years of historical data. What MMM really needs is variation. So in some cases, if you only have 1 year of data, but your sales are all over the place and you've got a lot of kind of signal to work with, that could be fine. But typically some length of historical data, and then capturing all of those levers that you feel have an impact on your business and what's actually going to drive a response overall. So that's your marketing spend, your sales performance, your pricing information, promotions, information on external factors. So what's the macroeconomy doing? Like, is that even relevant for your category and your business? Is it something else that kind of drives external demand and the overall kind of business return you can expect? So the more accurate, the more granular data that you can get, the more reliable the insights and the actions that you're going to be able to take off the back of it.
You may be anticipating this next question, but what if some of that data is missing? Does it mean you can't build an MMM model? Does it, restrict the ability to get good results? And I assume for many companies who are just starting out, that's going to be the reality, that some data is missing, incomplete, or just not granular enough. So, where does that leave them?
No, for sure. And I think there's always the ability to assess the data that's there, and it shouldn't stop you from considering starting the journey for MMM. No MMM is perfect, right? Whatever you do, you're choosing to take a lens of how you view your business over time. And within that lens, there's some kind of mandatory data that you need to have. But typically when we're collecting it, it's about what's the must-have data to deliver on the core use case or the core needs that you want to steer the business around. What's some important data that adds context, the ability to make more specific actions, but isn't necessary if it doesn't exist. And then ultimately, what's the nice to have data that gives you the ability to run specific questions or to really dig deeply into a specific action like customer lifetime value, for example, and how you might steer that through some of the media and marketing actions that you have available. So they're not the necessary data, but they're the things that allow you to go deeper. So typically if data's missing, if something's not available, there are also other techniques within how you build MMM, because it's not just one approach. There's a whole range of different modeling approaches and analytic methods you can use to create the data and the models themselves. So if you are a business where you have lots of different lines of business, but maybe inconsistent data available between those, then something like hierarchical Bayesian modeling could be a nice way for you to fill gaps in data, not necessarily fill gaps in data, but use what you've learned from one hierarchy or one section of your model to kind of inform where there's missing bits of data in another model. And that's a really typical way of kind of closing and bridging some of those gaps. But ultimately, that's why having some flexibility in the approach, having this kind of understanding and assessment of data in the first place is a good starting point to say, what's the best way for us to do this? What use cases can we unlock from it? And what business value can we create at the end?
And hierarchical Bayesian may not mean much to someone just starting out. So we may link to some information, just reading more about methodologies and types of MMM models, because we're not going to be covering that today. Before we move to the next question, you mentioned an example from automotive. So on that data, must have, nice to have, would you say that there would be a difference in that depending on what industry you're in?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because the business model for a fashion retailer is very different from the business model for an automotive manufacturer is very different from an FMCG company. So each vertical, each industry is going to have their own kind of necessary must-have data sets and their own contextual or value-added data sets, which aren't necessary but let you go deeper if you go down that path.
The next question is, getting on to how to implement MMM. And here it's really about, if you want to start, who are the providers? Who do you go to? Can you build it completely with your own data science team? What's available out there?
Yep. So within this space, we see typically 3 different ways of operating a model. On one end, you've got an external vendor. So someone like Ekimetrics, a specialist provider that is really built up teams that have a lot of experience and dedication in making the best of the space. Large media agencies also sit within this, where you might have the capacity within a media agency team that you have to also use an analyst team within there to build models. And that's typically where, if you don't have resource internally, if you're just starting on this path, you might want to leverage external expertise to make that happen. On the other side of the equation, you have more of like an in-house approach. So building up some of the tools, the people, the resource, and the capability internally to build your own approach. It can be great for very specific business models or approaches that you want to really tailor and make your own. But there's a internal cost of ownership, and you have to think about people management and about career paths and how you keep developing their skills and all of those things. And then there's somewhere in the middle, so like a hybrid approach where you might use an external vendor for model innovation and making sure that you're always pushing kind of the boundaries of what's happening in the media and marketing space, what's happening in the commercial space, how do you bridge those two, and how do you make sure that your capability is evolving over time while you have a kind of core internal team focused on the core data, the core kind of capabilities, and making sure that's working well in the business.
And I guess on that hybrid approach, there's also the ability to use a vendor to accelerate, to build something quickly, to set up, and then kind of migrate or continue to run it internally after that as well.
And for sure, and that's what's really important about this is it's not something you do once, or it shouldn't be something you do once. That's definitely one of the things that is something that creates a bad implementation practice, or it creates negative incentives in teams that run it that way. Is if you do an MMM once a year or once every few years, which kind of happens in many places, actually what you tend to see is that it just creates this effect of people using an MMM to say that they did a good job with what they did before, and not really taking it to say, okay, how do we think about continuous improvement? To be in that continuous improvement mode means you're also thinking about how that capability evolves over time. So if you start external and you see the benefits and you want to make that internal, then everything is like transferable. There's nothing about MMM that can't be rebuilt, redeployed, or even with the tools that are available in the market, licensed to kind of bring that in internally and make sure that you can kind of own and manage that going forwards as well.
I feel like you're biased. We're probably both biased, but do you think it's always better to use an external vendor over an internal team to build MMM?
So no, it's based on like the ambitions that you have as a company as well, and how you want to build, manage teams, make sure that you're staying at the front of the industry as well. So having specialist econometrics knowledge can be important. You're in a company that spends a lot around both your commercial and your marketing spends. You might want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to kind of both capture those long-term kind of positioning and strategic use cases, as well as the deep optimization use cases, and having real specialist knowledge that brings together the sector, MMM, etc., and combine them in the best way can be really helpful. But clients that build an internal capability, they know it reduces the need for external support, but it requires a lot of focus on how they animate that team, how they give them a career path internally, how much they need to grow that team over time as well, because it can be a big team that you end up having, and how do you kind of keep that going? So it's really about ambition. It's about doing the right thing for the business. And, you know, I talked with Tom Hallett, who's the head of UK media effectiveness at Sky. They've been on a long journey to build a large internal team over 10 years and really fully manage this process. And they have some amazing use cases that they've enabled off the back of that, and a way that they can make decisions. But it's a strategic investment choice for that business, which came really from a very senior level. And if you don't have that trust, if you don't have that seniority of kind of support and engagement, it can be a difficult path to tread to go internally, because there's also a lot of politics that can get involved when you start talking about budgets and where that budget should sit. So many clients kind of value hybrid of having a team that is able to kind of source all the questions internally, kind of present the client kind of view of the world, the brand view of the world, and what's important to them and their strategy and the direction they want to take. But leverage kind of some of the external expertise that can come through to make sure you've got the best approaches, that you've got external thinking to challenge some of the assumptions that might exist internally. And sometimes it's good to have an external voice there to say, I know you think this, but here's all the case studies and use cases we've seen from other places, which actually says that's not really the way it works. And maybe you need to think about it in this way. So there's a lot you can do from that. But ultimately, one of the most important aspects is by accelerating a starting point. So using an external vendor can just really give you that boost to accelerate, to scale, to get your first inputs, to really start thinking about how you can transform as a business. And then that's when it's kind of working and you've established is where you can think about maybe taking it internal as well.
Last point on this, because you've mentioned the Sky team, and I know they have a big team and they have profiles in their big econometrics skill sets and also media knowledge. Do you think it's possible for companies to have an internal MMM just with the data science team?
It can be done. It can be done. I'm being hesitant on this one because it's hard, right? A marketing mix modeling approach is not a pure science. There is domain knowledge, there is business knowledge, and the way that you translate that across from the data and the models that you're seeing into the business to be useful, that not every data science team has that ability to think in that way, because ultimately they're different disciplines that you're trying to create. The kind of quick summary is that for a data scientist, you're trying to build the best performing model you can with the fewest inputs to make sure that you're really having a churn or prediction model that only uses the data that's most intensifying the signal and the outcome. Whereas an MMM, you can't exclude data, because if you spend in it, the business wants to know, is there a return from that? And so even if it doesn't fit, it's much more about confidence intervals and risk and what's the type of commercial decision that you might take off the back of this. And do you have the confidence in the data to take that scale of a business decision, or do you need to run an experiment to make sure that you've got the confidence to make that happen? So that type of thinking isn't always available in place, and it comes from some of the sector experience as well that really makes marketing mix modeling more of this bridge between an art of an analytics application and more of the science behind the statistics and the models themselves.
For sure. So we have spoken, a lot about what MMM is, what some of the benefits are. The next question is about the limitations of MMM. What can't it do, or what are some of the watch-outs to keep in mind?
Like I said at the beginning, I don't believe marketing mix modeling is a silver bullet that does everything. And that's important for us as Ekimetrics as well, is that we really see ourselves as bringing together an ecosystem of approaches that give you this kind of unified view of performance across a business. One of the kind of biggest limitations or watch-outs is when it comes to very granular or very small spends or very new activity, is that's typically hard to pick up within the model. And that's where something like an experiment is going to be better placed to say, is this having an effect, and is it something that you actually want to scale? Things that take a very long time to see an effect as well can also be hard to kind of isolate or pull out within a marketing mix model. It's hard to pull out anywhere, to be honest, if it takes a very long time to show that effect. And again, that might be where you look at a long-term holdout as a way to pick that up. That's more of some of the limitations around the approach itself and what it can do. A limitation just organizationally is data collection, and the kind of mapping process of that data can be a barrier. MMM is a data intensive process because to do it well, you need to capture a lot of data that covers a broad range of those business levers that can affect your business. And they're not always well controlled or well captured within those businesses. So the lift sometimes to get off the ground to start can be a manual and time consuming process, and it needs resource to support that in the right way. But then it also needs the process to make sure that that's not a barrier to implementation in the future, because it also shouldn't be an excuse not to do analytics. It shouldn't be an excuse not to measure what you're doing by not having the data in place. And actually, the most important thing is to say, what should I be doing to collect the right data, and how do I start putting those processes in place?
One other thing that I see a lot, especially from clients, companies that are using a multi-touch attribution solution at the moment, is that they're used to very high frequency updates, real-time view on campaigns, and MMM doesn't really do that. So what is, the highest frequency that you think someone can start off with MMM?
I don't think that refreshing a model on a daily basis and some applications that people focus on in that space mean much in the context of what MMM really is, and that kind of lens of making a strategic case, like a strategic business plan or a strategic impact over time. So typically quarterly would be like a kind of good mix where there's time for movement in channels, in how your promotions and retailer distribution networks are changing, and what that means in terms of the interplay between those and how you can think about pulling them apart. Some use monthly if they're really focused a lot on changing a lot of commercial plans, and they really want to make sure that it's tied to kind of target setting, and how do you manage that in the best way, and getting in a very competitive agile space, how do you manage that? But yeah, typically quarterly would be kind of the more reasonable end of something that's still a frequent capability, but not kind of over twisting yourself as an organization to get to that scale.
So I have seen some MMM providers, some platforms saying that they have real time, and a lot of it is often AI generated MMM. Based on what you've just said, would you approach something like that with caution?
So there's definitely the use of AI in what the work we do, and in building a good model, and in making sure the outputs are interpretable, for example. So AI can be a real accelerator for data and for mapping that data and understanding, is this data quality data, or are there risks in using it, and things like that. Honestly, I think real-time data or using an AI-driven real-time model is a myth, or it's not taking what MMM is and what it can be in terms of those longer term views of performance, and really steering between the strategic and the tactic in that kind of common currency view. If you are using a daily updating or real time even MMM model, you're really focused on the very tactical granular end of the business, and it can be impactful for you if you only spend in performance marketing, and you really need to tune that as a optimization routine. But you miss so much more on the how can you evolve your business model, what can you be doing in the future, how do you chart a path to something better, and you need more time, and you need a different view of performance to help you answer those questions. I think the bit that some of those AI models miss can be the human intervention and the human understanding of what's going on under the data. Does it really make sense? How do we treat this in a way so that actually we can make sense of it and kind of capture some of those dynamics in a way that the business understand, and how they want to make decisions there? And then I think the other use of AI that we're really starting to explore now is especially around AI agents as well. How can you use sector knowledge and embed that in an AI agent to make better, help clients better understand the output and how they can use it, so that you're not reliant on the team always being available, the expert team always being available, but you can use AI to help you interpret and understand data when you're in a big global organization of hundreds or thousands of marketers around the world.
That segues very nicely into the next question, which is about interpreting MMM results. And so the question really is, how can you do it? Can anyone just look at the results and understand what kind of decisions to make? Or do you need specific skills or training to, take the outputs, so, ROIs, response curves, and, take that into the business and make decisions and changes?
So I think the basic outputs of an MMM are fairly understandable, right? So you've got kind of contributions and incrementality, and you've got ROI. How much did your media drive your business, and what was the return on investment that you had from that spend? The danger is that there's a lot of nuance behind those figures, and there's a lot of room for like misinterpretation or what that means. Like the wrong thing to do is overtune towards ROI, right? You can the easiest thing to do to improve your ROI is to spend less, because the more you spend, the more you're kind of exposed to a diminishing returns curve. And if you don't understand that conceptually, if you don't have that in mind, then you can really start making some wrong decisions based on true and very good data, but just with that kind of gap in understanding, it's not there. The other side that's really important around more of the expertise is the confidence level in different outputs, because it is a model. Like, it's not truth. The model is only based on the data that's available and the time period that you have it available for, and what variation you can see in that time period. Which means some things you might not have the data to be fully confident in, but you have like a direction or a signal of direction and strength. And so it's really important to be able to just say, okay, this is what we're seeing. We're not fully confident in it. And actually, this is what we'd recommend you do to make sure that the next time you run this, next quarter or whenever you're running the next kind of iteration, that you're in a better place to be more confident in the output and the data as well. The other thing that makes a big difference is understanding synergies that happen between channels. So the temptation is to just put all your money behind the highest ROI channel, the one that has the biggest opportunity to scale. But also there's a lot of research and understanding that says the more channels you use, then actually the better the overall returns as well, because there's a synergy effect that goes between them. How do you chart and how do you steer between what's the right mix, what's the right number of channels that give you that synergy, but where you have a significant level of spend so that you're actually creating cut through in the environment that you're advertising in? And how do you tune a promotional plan, like priced reductions, for example, alongside your media so that your media is having a really positive effect on your business, maybe helping you maximize the incrementality of your promotions, but also meaning that you don't need to promote as much, for example. So there's a lot that takes more of that expertise to kind of pull out. And that's not going to be something that you just read from a report or from a dashboard or from some figures that you see on a page.
And I guess it's that bringing together of multiple insights and taking them all together to make the plan that you're going to execute on. That becomes the challenge. So onto the next question, which we've touched on a little bit, but just to really pull out, how is MMM different from other techniques like multi-touch attribution and experiments?
Yeah, I think there's like a broader sphere of marketing analytics in general, right? So you've got maybe your promotional incrementality tests that you have going on. You've got brand tracking, you've got experiments, you've got attribution, you've just got your media performance metrics that exist, like your cost per thousand, your view through rates, your clicks, etc. And they all have a place. Like they're all there and they're all important to understand, and they're all things that people can do in different departments and different teams and really help create better outcomes. I think what makes marketing mix modeling different and what makes Econometrics powerful as a tool is that it really analyzes kind of aggregate effectiveness in over time. And it's saying, okay, where can you get the strongest or the biggest effect from? And then once you know where you want to put spend, where you want to put your time and effort, you can use other techniques to really help you dig into like, how do you maximize that and how do you make it go further? So yeah, MMM is less granular than attribution, but it's more holistic. So it doesn't allow you to go into the depth of detail, but it captures stuff that attribution doesn't even have in its view at all. It's all actionable and external factors. So it really captures this broad view of performance. And within the way Econometrics is implemented, it's not so important to follow a single unit, like a single user journey or a single audience. It's a good alternative and a privacy safe alternative to kind of cookie-based analytics. And then ultimately the ability to have strategic insights and the way you steer your business over a long term connected to how you think about performance in the short term is a really powerful kind of lens to have and a common currency to share across the business.
So the next one is one of my favorite questions. Can MMM predict future sales?
So prediction and scenario planning are really important. The use of marketing mix modeling can help you say, what are we gonna do next? Like, what are our next sales going to be? If we do this with our marketing plan, if we do this with our promotions, how is that going to help affect our sales? And will it improve our sales or make it worse?
So that sounds like a yes answer.
Yeah, it's a yes. The thing that makes it complete is the ability to really run a demand forecast approach, because, typically if you're, most businesses or most big businesses, you're looking at between 10 to 20% of your sales, maybe pushing 30% of your sales coming from kind of marketing factors within a period of time. The rest is going to be like your base distribution, kind of the existing history of the brand in that market. And it takes a lot longer to kind of shift that over time. So within that 20 to 30%, you can kind of tune and optimize that and say, okay, what will that help deliver in terms of uplift? But you also need something to help you say what's happening with that other like 70 to 80% that's going on. And so that's where bringing in forecasting techniques, so to help you with what's your kind of base demand forecast, bringing that into an MMM approach can really help you with much stronger scenario planning and actually be much more confident about that prediction of future sales as well.
And just to be really explicit about this, because I feel like maybe some people, don't know this or would find it surprising, but when we say future sales, we're not just talking volume sales, right? We're talking about profit, revenue that you can forecast as long as you've modeled that.
No, for sure. And that's what's really important about this is the KPIs that you can have as a model are things that range from, your sales volume to the value to the profit. Other factors, it can be your brand or it can be your carbon footprint associated from selling those products as well. And so being able to steer between those means that you can really say, okay, if we play this price lever, how is it going to affect our volume? Is that good for us from a value perspective? What does it mean from profit? What does it mean from a frequency perspective? If you have a view from a customer, like how do we play with price so that we're maximizing customer lifetime value, minimizing the volume that they're buying overall, so it has kind of a good kind of planet, profit and people kind of perspective to all of it as well. It's difficult to do. We've spent a lot of time developing that ourselves. So within our tools, within the One Vision platform that we use with our clients, we have a scenario planning kind of capability within that. So you can bring together what your marketing plan is, what your commercial plan is, and also to bring in those predicted external factors so that you can really have a view of what could happen to your business next year and how might you think to optimize or maximize your performance within that.
So as an example, you can predict or, forecast that you think your competitors are going to increase their spend by X, and you can play that scenario out.
Completely. And, we have some clients where, let's say in the telco space, where they're thinking about this mix of propositions, what competitors are doing, what type of customer acquisition promotions are going on, a huge array of different scenarios going through that. And we can kind of output like all of those parameters, all of the different scenarios that are going on, and kind of say, what's the golden path of proposition, marketing, promotion, pricing, handsets, and stuff that kind of navigate the largest number of those scenarios, but also say, if it's one of those edge scenarios that you weren't really planning for, what does that mean? And how do you make sure that you're managing that situation well? So
that on the actionable owned factors, you can predict, and on the external ones, you can simulate.
You can simulate and you can react. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I've only got a couple of questions left. Second to last, should all brands be investing in having MMM?
No, I think is the first answer. It's not about it's the best tool for everyone. It's the best tool for a lot of people that get to a certain level of spend, get a certain level of complexity, and get to a certain level of kind of dynamics that they need to manage and growth overall. Like an easy answer is the size of media spend that you have. a more complete answer is actually the size of just investment or commercial spend you have overall. So what are you doing from a gross to net perspective? What are you spending on promotions? What are you spending on trade terms or things that you just give away higher up the P&L that you just do because that's kind of practice to give discounts to big retailers or things like that? What does that actually do in terms of the business and how what that unlocks for you? So if you don't spend a lot in media, but you still have a lot of spend across your P&L, MMM can still be a really powerful tool, and which is why it's not media mix modeling, it's marketing mix modeling. And when we talk about marketing mix modeling, we really talk about the 4 Ps in all their kind of full everything within that mix. The kind of transition point for a lot of businesses where they go from experiments or attribution into MMM is really, let's say you're a scale up and you're going from like a pure, we only care about acquisition and we're focused on our cost per acquisition, our CPA, into, okay, we've started to invest behind our brand. We've done some offline activity. We've focused a bit more now on retention as well as acquisition and how do we manage that? And you start to be pulling on levers that you just can't cover with an experiment or an attribution as well. And that can be a really good launch pad for a marketing mix modeling approach. Ultimately, MMM is becoming more accessible. Google have launched Meridian as kind of an open source modeling tool. Meta have Robin. There's vendors in the space that just offer modeling solutions as well. So the barrier to entry is a bit lower. You can kind of start internally, but then it's also risky because you can have like a bad experience from not having that expertise in place. And that can cause kind of a lack of confidence early on in a process. So you need to choose kind of the right moment when you've got the right mix of skills, talent, external support or partnership to kind of help you make the right choice as well.
So that was all of the, FAQs, as it were. But, these questions, they're really things that we looked at that people would be putting into Google searching. And we're really assuming these are, brands that are maybe at the start of either ready to implement MMM or researching it as an option. And so the last question is just really, do you have any advice or words of wisdom for brands that are at that point in their journey?
Yeah, so I think start with what's the business case for MMM in the first place. And, typically you can look between, from a pure media perspective, 10 to 30% kind of optimization of your media. And if you're spending enough to mean that kind of optimization potential can pay for itself, then that's a good business case of getting there. The other side is then to look at not just your media spend, but the wider kind of spend that you have overall. And so, okay, does the business case extend further and mean the lift in terms of bringing the teams together, make that happen? So focusing on the business case, the value you want to create and the impact you want to have kind of unlocks that first door. Assessing your data, I think, is really critical, and making sure you've got the right data in place to manage a solution, and thinking about how you want to interface with the business, because there's no point just standing up a tool which then no one uses to make a decision internally. So how are you weaving the outputs from a model into the decision-making process that exists in the business now? And then also thinking about how do you transform that decision-making process so that it really becomes a central part of how you steer and how you think about the decisions in the long term, right down to the kind of everyday tactical decisions that you're making within your campaigns and your promotional plans.
A scenario that we do hear about quite often is when switching to MMM, performance teams that have been using digital attribution may see an ROI figure that they're used to go down in an MMM output. So I think the focus on change management, really, having an open mind going into MMM and accepting those results with, some confidence and also acceptance that they're different, is probably going to factor in that change process.
For sure. And, we didn't talk about it so much earlier when talking about the different analytics techniques, but what's really important is that if you're using a term like ROI, you need to be careful about when you use it and that it's really ROI. And for something like attribution, it can't be, because it's a limited view of the world and it's a limited view of what actually drives your business performance. And so that typically might be something like ROAS, but there are many companies where a team has been kind of trained to say that, yeah, we have an ROI of 10 from our like digital activity because of attribution. And you go in with an MMM figure that says actually it's 3, and it can create a lot of challenge, internal tension. I don't believe the models. Like, how do we manage this in the right way? So that sense of change, education, understanding what are the kind of the truths that exist in the business now, and how do you think about managing that transition and what it means to kind of stand up this type of new capability is really critical. Because like I said, if you have a model that isn't used in decision making, then you've wasted your time creating the model. And so the most important thing is to make sure you are finding the way to bring it into decision making processes, which means ultimately making sure people are confident to take a decision off the back of that model.
And maybe just to repeat, in case it got lost right at the start, what you said about the size of prize. You're talking about a potential of 20 to 30% efficiency gain in your media. So, that's a huge opportunity and reason to go through what could be, just some growing pains getting used to using MMM. Thanks so much, Matt, for joining, for letting me grill you on everything MMM. I feel like we've covered a lot there and hopefully busted some myths as well along the way. Thanks so much for tuning in to our podcast. Hit subscribe if you want to stay updated with our next episodes. You can also access episodes we already have there with some of our clients, industry leaders talking about their own journey in measurement and analytics. And you can visit our website to read white papers, look at content on not just marketing, but also on data science transformation, on other measurement techniques like customer analytics, and also on the topic of AI. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.